issues that matter. You're watching King 5 News Up Front with Robert Mak.
It's the latest argument by some activists and lawmakers. Can closing tax loopholes help solve the state's $5 billion shortfall? Welcome back. One person's loophole is another person's tax incentive. Is this really a solution to the budget crisis? Where can the state find easy money? This online game suggests it's as easy as whacking a tax loophole. Click your mouse and whack a tax break for things like bull semen insemination, tobacco production, and real estate commissions.
Maybe it allows some people to let off steam, but it's not a viable option in this particular session of the legislature.
The ranking Republican on the Senate Ways and Means Committee says closing a loophole is just another way of saying tax increase.
So what I need somebody to tell me is how we can increase somebody's taxes and expect that the neighbor that they have that may be unemployed or underemployed has a better shot at getting fully employed or finding a job.
Even Democratic Governor Christine Gregoire says don't go there.
I'm not unsympathetic to what they're saying. I thought that when I ran for governor. And then when I got here, I learned up close and personal. It's much easier said than done.
But unions, teachers, social workers, they all say it's time to make a change.
At the end of the day, we have almost 600 tax exemptions in the state.
Democrat Reuven Carlisle says tax exemptions should only last so long.
The idea that tax exemptions should continue in perpetuity and then require a 2/3 majority in order to sunset them is undemocratic, and frankly ridiculous.
Is this one way to solve the budget crunch? Let's ask Chris Sjoblum, Vice President of the Washington Research Council, which examines issues from a business perspective, and Adam Glickman, Vice President of SEIU Healthcare, the Service Employees International Union. Adam, let me start with you. At the top of your list, if you were to take away some tax exemptions, give me a couple examples. What would be at the top of your list? Where could the state save some money?
Well, first, let's put this in the context of the overall budget deficit. We're facing a $6 billion deficit. The legislature is looking at making deep, devastating cuts to K-12 education, to higher education, to services for the most vulnerable, to the basic health plan. So in that context, we think that tax breaks for Wall Street banks, tax breaks for owners of private jets, tax breaks for elective cosmetic surgery, tax breaks for out-of-state shoppers should really be considered. And are those a priority? Are those as high a priority as funding the basic health plan? Are those as high a priority as funding K-12 education?
Okay, you've thrown out a couple examples out there.
Yep. Chris, let me focus on one, the tax break for out-of-state banks. That is a tax break that they receive on mortgage lending. Every indication is that if we increase the taxes that they pay on the mortgages, they're going to ratchet up the interest rate they charge on mortgages in lockstep. Right now is just not a good time to make housing more expensive.
What about some of the other examples? Cosmetic surgery, private jets you mentioned. I mean, is there some low-hanging fruit here that could be tackled?
The problem with cosmetic surgery in particular is the one of definition, figuring out what is cosmetic as opposed to really medically necessary. It would be amazing how many of these procedures end up being defined as medically necessary.
Isn't that the problem? The governor mentioned that all these sound of like good targets when you look at just the name of them, but the governor says once she started going in and trying to look at each of them, there's a reason why each of them is there. Each tax exemption has a constituency, and it's just not something that you can do, is what she's saying.
I recognize that's a challenge, but I think the problem is there's real reasons why we invest in K-12 education. There's real reasons why we invest in higher education. There's real reasons why we need to preserve a safety net for vulnerable seniors and people with disabilities. And right now we have a budget process where all we're looking at in Olympia is should we cut education or healthcare? Should we cut higher education or services for seniors? And there's this whole other part of the budget, 500 plus tax breaks. Some might be justified, some might not be, but they're not being considered in comparing their value to the value of the services that the people of the state demand.
So I think it's important when you think about a tax system that you have a tax system that's stable over time, so that businesses can make long-term investment plans, location plans, based on a tax system that's going to be around for a while. When you start pulling the tax system into the annual or biannual budget process, and you say that these features that you see today are only good till the next time legislatures get into Olympia, you introduce a whole level of uncertainty to the business environment that can't be good for the economy.
Are you saying that legislators can't ever go in and look at these exemptions and re-examine them and see where they're worthwhile? I mean, one of the representatives, Reuben Carlyle, was saying, you know, this idea that they're permanent tax exemptions should be thrown out, that they should be reevaluated at a certain time.
No, but it does argue for a stable system of evaluation like we have with the Citizens Commission on tax preferences, where they operate on a 10-year cycle reviewing them. It's not the case that they're all coming up every year.
Let me go back to the point of, isn't this a bad time? Because essentially you're raising taxes on some industry at some point, and is that going to cost jobs, and is this the best time to do that?
You know, I think in a lot of ways the worst thing you can do during a recession is cut services for the most vulnerable. Right? Reduce our investments in K through 12 education, reduce our investments in higher ed, reduce funding for affordable health care for working families. Those are the kinds of de-investments that are going to throw our state deeper into a recession.
Well, no, I mean, ultimately, the way you get out of a recession in the long run is by growing the economy. And taking short-term hits on businesses through tax, going after the tax system, is really counterproductive.
One of the things I heard from protesters, there were labor groups and so forth at the Capitol last week, was they just felt that, you know, it's the equation that Adam has laid out here is you're cutting services, and they felt the businesses and corporations should pay their fair share to some extent.
Well, right now, with the existing tax system, businesses pay over half of the taxes that the state collects. Relatively high percentage when you look across the states nationally. It's not as if they aren't paying their share.
The governor said, as a practical matter, she proposed doing something about this when she ran for governor, but she started looking at what effect it would have on the economy. She started looking at the practicality of getting a 2/3 vote in the legislature to take away any of these exemptions because they are considered tax increases. And she says it's just not worth the time to go through this because, as a political matter, it's not going to get through the legislature.
I mean, I think the public has said quite clearly they want a balanced approach to solving the budget deficit. People understand that there needs to be cuts in spending, but people also think that you can't just cut $6 billion from education, healthcare, and social services and not tear the state apart and not ruin what's great about this state. We also need to look at closing targeted tax exemptions, tax breaks. We need to look at reforming the tax break system so we don't just, over the last decade, we've created 100 new tax breaks, costing hundreds of millions of dollars.
So one of the things that I'm worried about going forward is that this is just going to end up as a ballot measure. The decision about how to deal with tax preferences ought to be based on solid economic analysis, not the results of focus groups.
And with that, I am out of time. Chris Sjoblom, Adam Glickman, thank you both. A good discussion. Thank you.